Well, I've always thought Cooper Angus was very strategically placed in the centre of Strathmore. So if you visit here, you can, uh, well, learn about the history of the town to start with, but you're not far away from lots of other very interesting places. Um, in Meagle, there's a Pictish stone museum, and that's a very good place to visit. You can go to Ailiffe. It's got lots of old buildings, same as Blairgowrie. And there are other settlements in different directions, which are all within less than an hour's travel time. So it's a good spot.
Cooper Angus is a great place to visit. It's got the area is very lush and green. There's plenty of places to go walking. If you want to play golf, it's an easy place to access if you want to go to Dundee or Perth.
I think the location is very interesting because Cooper Angus is such a nexus point for the whole of the Strathmore area. People are travelling through Cooper Angus to get to places, so most people will pass the town even if they don't go into it. With the Strathmore Community Hub being available for usage for people within the PH10 and PH13 areas, this means that most people will have travelled through the town but might not have a reason to stop in and stay, and this will hopefully provide something like that. So hopefully people will be moving through and they'll be able to find a reason to stop in a little bit longer.
Unfortunately, Blairgowrie hasn't got the spaces available to let us start up there.
There were no premises available. We did look for quite a long time and had a few very disappointing options put up to us. And then purely by chance, I suppose Keith must have been walking past that part of town in Cooper Angus and saw the for sale sign up, the NHS for sale sign for the centre. So we thought, well, that could be a good building for a men's shed.
The project began with Keith seeing the for sale sign on the building, talking to David about it, also talking to me about it, and it just sort of grew legs, really.
It was one of the few buildings that has been empty for a long time. It was the old doctor's surgery and has been empty for about 7 or 8 years. It was the GP practice, then it became a mental health centre and closed, and it was ripe for redevelopment.
It was pretty much the right size for a men's shed, which is the time we were actually looking for a men's shed to move into. But we quickly realised that that was a bit big for a men's shed, so it just seemed to be a really good choice for building for a relatively small community.
The idea was to use the building for men's shed, but we rapidly found out that we couldn't get funding to buy the building for just a single project like that it had to be wider. So that's when we widened it out to community, because we knew that it could accommodate men's shed, not their workshop, but a sort of a soft area for them to play chess or cards or do things like that.
The way forward was opened when Perth and Kinross Council, I think it was Councillor Fiona Sarwart, who now our local councillor, thought that the project was a great project to support, and the central government, Scottish Government's Town Centres Fund grant process had started for the particular year, which I think was 2019, and she encouraged us to apply for a grant towards the cost of the building. We got that grant, which was up 150,000, and we were allowed to pay professionals to undertake the necessary design work that was required. Otherwise, we really would have struggled.
The biggest challenge initially was getting the funding. Once we had the funding, the challenge was dealing with the NHS property department, which just seemed to go round and round in circles. We approached John Swinney, and he has been a huge help in helping us overcome obstacles that were coming up with the NHS property department. And also Pete Wishart helped us overcome the issues that came up. They wanted to put unreasonable things in the contracts that we could and couldn't do, and square footage that could be used for this or that, and we couldn't agree. So with their help, these things were overcome, and it was quite difficult at the time because we're all volunteers and we're not legal people, but it was got round and sorted out. So the support we've had from funders is we've had support from DTAS, and that was to help us to get a business plan together, and other bits and pieces of training, which has been very useful for actually sort of getting things organised in the very beginning.
The first funder, if you like, was the Scottish Land Fund, who were set up to help communities through the community asset transfer process, which was, when we started out, was legislation, but it hadn't yet been signed off. So they were backed up by another government department in Edinburgh called Community Ownership Support Service, and they helped us through the process of applying for our first grant to the Scottish Land Fund, which was actually a grant for carrying out the feasibility study and the business plan, because the Scottish Land Fund wanted that done before they would entertain handing over a larger sum of money to buy the property.
I think there's quite a lot of groups will be very interested in using it, and there are different sizes of rooms in it. There's some quite large ones and some small ones, which I mentioned before, the consultation rooms which the doctors used to use. So it's got a lot of adaptability, and I'm sure it'll be pretty attractive to various people.
My personal one that I'm hoping will happen is that my fibre group will expand. We were doing needle felting at the hub before COVID, but also exploring some of the other fibre experiences.
I'm uncertain about this, but I expect a number of new groups will be formed because this will give them a venue to use, which they haven't had up to now.
Early stages, obviously, we've explored various uses over the years. It's been looking at it, some of which are written down in the early business plan. Men's Shed was the primary one, as I've already said, but it's quite quickly other groups in the town who previously used the town hall, but found some of its spaces far too large, like the table tennis club and the knitting groups, sewing groups, and things like that were options. But really, it's wide open